Some guests never check out. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Join us as we check into a vacation from hell. This is the third episode in our new series, all about the horror of the motel. In today's episode, we discuss Ty West's The Innkeepers.
All right. Well, like Lisa said in that intro, this episode is going to be focused around the film The Innkeepers by Ty West. If you're not familiar with the film, it did come out in 2011 and was written and directed by Ty West, who is also known for House of the Devil, Pearl, and X, as well as a few others, I believe. The movie is starring Sarah Paxton and Pat Healy and Kelly McGillis. So I guess to kind of start off, I guess, just kind of give my first impressions, overall thoughts, and as we tend to do on these types of episodes, and we could kind of roundtable afterwards and then get to some of the points we want to discuss. But I'll say, first off, I knew practically nothing about this film going into it. I knew that it was written and directed by Ty West. And I'm going to say something shameful, which is I haven't seen any of Ty West's films, actually. They're on my list to watch, but I just haven't gotten to it yet. I know Pearl, X, and House of the Devil. I've heard all of them are great, but just have not been able to carve out the time to watch them for some reason. So I knew very little about this movie going into it, and it's available, at least as of right now when we're recording this. Late February 2025. It's available for streaming on Amazon Prime for free. Well, free if you have Amazon Prime. um, but I mean, I really knew very little going into it. I knew it was. I kind of read the synopsis that you get when before you watch the movie, and it was basically what it sounded like when we were talking about adding this in for this series, where it's just people investigating a possibly haunted hotel because it's on the verge of shutting down. And so not knowing a whole lot about it, um, I'll say it had some interesting moments. Based on the screenshots that Amazon had before I watched it, I was almost wondering if it was a found footage sort of thing, but it actually wasn't. I think it was just the screenshots they selected just kind of looked that way, just happened to be framed to look like found footage. So it's not a found footage movie, but it basically follows two characters who are spending their last weekend in this inn called the Yankee Peddler, and it's spelled Pedlar. And I don't know if that's some sort of intentional misspelling or peddler, Peddler is how it's supposed to be spelled. Um, but anyway, so it mostly follows Claire and Luke, who are the last two employees left as this hotel is about to shut down, go out of business. And I know some of the background on the movie, having read up after watching it, was that it was actually filmed at a real hotel of the same name. And apparently this is where they stayed during House of the Devil, and they had some weird experiences. So um, I think Lisa was the one who added that to our notes. So I definitely want to circle back to that once we kind of get through our initial impressions. But overall, I mean, I liked the movie. It was It was rather slow though, it's very much atmospheric. So very little in big scares, not like scare a minute kind of thing. Very, very slow burner type of thing. And my only real like major criticism is that I wish that they had maybe explained the lore of this hotel, of this world that they were building, because it felt like there was a lot more room for them to explore that, and they didn't. So anyway, I mean, I thought it was a pretty good movie. So Mel, Lisa, what are your like opening thoughts on this?
Well, Matt, I am like you. I didn't know much of anything about this movie. I know Lisa had mentioned it before, and she was the one who suggested that we watch it for this episode. So I went in just kind of looking at the summary on Prime, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was an interesting movie. I have a similar, yeah, I think if I was going to have a criticism, it would be what you were saying, Matt. Like there's a history to the end, and we kind of get it at one point. They have these kind of cue cards, and part two or chapter two is supposed to be about the ghost and her history, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that. But then there's the dots aren't really connected because there's a possibility that the ghosts are actually like that didn't. I mean, it seems like it's a very good possibility that that did not go down as the quote unquote history says it did, because we don't know where that information is coming from. It's probably like more like folklore stories, and so the communications from the ghost, I guess you would say, seem to belie that there's something else going on. So I'm not sure if the intention was that, ghost hunters never know for sure what's going on. Like if you don't have the real story, you can't find it through a haunting. Like it's just confused and ambiguous or what. But yeah, I wished we had gotten a little bit more about that. That was one of the things at the end. I'm just like, oh, why is this happening? But on the whole, I enjoyed it. I like it. Kind of starts out as like a lighthearted might be too strong of a word, I guess, but yeah, I mean, it's a kind of like a workplace comedy in a way, and it kind of makes us, I think, care about the characters before scarier things happen later on. But yeah, there's long periods of time where it's just them kind of goofing off because there's barely anybody in the hotel because it's the last few days that it's open, and so they're trying to take this opportunity to do all this ghost hunting because they're not going to be on for work as much as they typically are, and they're kind of blowing stuff off. And so they've got like a mom and her kid in the beginning, and then the actress turned medium, played by Kelly McGillis, and then an older man who comes to stay in the honeymoon suite, which is like one of the central haunted places, supposedly in the hotel. Um, so at the beginning, I mean, there's some parts where I was kind of chuckling because it was just kind of funny, like, and it gave me almost like a Ghostbusters type feel. The music had a slightly almost Ghostbusters feel to it, like some of the ominous music when it was kind of in that, still in that kind of almost like comedic mix in the beginning. And they even mentioned Gozer at one point in the movie. So I thought, yeah, that's, it's interesting that I was already having like a, uh, that kind of vibe, and then they do that. I also wondered if the fact that the actress starred in a movie called The Waking of Eleanor was like a Hill House shout out. I have no idea, but I thought that was interesting as well, um, especially with some of the other names in the movie. But yeah, I think I liked the slight genre mixing with the kind of comic aspect. I liked the idea of kind of naive people wanting to ghost hunt and meet a real ghost and then actually doing it, and how traumatic that would be if it actually happened in this way. Um, so yeah, I'm glad I watched it. I enjoyed it. So I mean, I guess before I pass it on to you, Lisa, I should say thank you for bringing this movie to our attention.
Yeah, no problem. I do have a question for you, Mel, though, because I'm a little bit shocked that Matt has not seen any Ty West films, and I feel a bit guilty as um I made you watch this one first. But have you seen any of his other films? Or was this your first
Yeah.
as well?
This was my first one as well,
No.
and I remember I think you mentioned this one to me a while back as one you thought I might like, but I just never got to watch it until this
Yes.
time.
Yes. And now, I don't know, listeners, maybe this is too much behind the scenes planning, but I feel like in our future we have to do a Ty West watch through, at least to hit the high points. Because yeah, Mel, I might have suggested this one to you because I feel like it would fit in your wheelhouse, being more supernatural and having the ghost hunting kind of Ghostbusters aspect to it. Um, but yeah, he's done some of my favorite films, like House of the Devil, the one that came out prior. I think it was 2 years prior to this one. Is one of my all-time favorites. And then of course, I mean, X and Pearl and Maxine, like that whole trilogy. I mean, I think Pearl is my favorite out of all of them, but I love those. I love those movies like deeply. So, I mean, especially Pearl. Pearl's really good. But yeah, I like I said, I feel a little bit bad that I let this be your first introduction. Because I feel like in his overall like film canon, I don't want to say this is a little, well, I'll say this is a little bit of an outlier. It's much quieter than some of the others. I mean, Pearl and X and Maxine, like that trilogy, that's very much got, the kind of like slasher vibes, bloody, gory. Yeah, they're set in different time periods. So they each have their own kind of feel and tone to them, but it that's what it is a slasher. And then House of the Devil is this great kind of 70s supernatural throwback. And then he did one that's called The Sacrament, which is one of those films that I don't know if I could watch again, because it bothered me so much. It's basically a like Jim Jones retelling of the whole like Jonestown cult situation. Like he takes that story and makes it fiction, and it's not a super fun watch, as you can imagine. It's intense. Um, yeah, but anyway, I can't believe that I let this be y'all's first one into this. But I will say on the rewatch, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as much as I did the first time. And there are a lot of things that I do like about this film. I think I do like that it's a little bit slower paced. Because I think you do get to spend time with the characters in the hotel, and to me it feels like a very real place. Um, there is and I mentioned this a little bit in our notes when we were talking about this episode, but like there is this very uncanny feeling in an empty hotel, or an almost empty hotel. I mean, that's what like The Shining kind of draws from. But in this one in particular, I don't know, it felt very real. And I think because it is a real place, and we could talk a little bit about like the real hotel, and where West was like inspired to do this. But I noticed that, there were times in the beginning of the film where Claire, for instance, leaves to go get coffee, and she has just kind of a weird conversation with the barista and comes back, and you kind of sense her boredom and how she's kind of over everything. And then there were moments where like they would interact with the guests who are there, um or the guest would leave. Like there were moments where I noticed where the guest would leave the hotel. The hotel would be really kind of quiet and barren almost. And then the guest would leave out the front door, and you would hear the bustle of the street for just a few seconds. And it was this kind of like grounding in the real world, which you don't always get in these kind of like haunted hotel supernatural stories. Um, and so I do feel like that works in this particular story's advantage is like the fact that it is so slow in setting up everything, that it feels to me very grounded. And so I think when the haunting stuff does start to happen and become real, it does. Mel, you use the word traumatic, and I think that's like a perfect example, or a perfect word, because I think it does feel very traumatic and it feels very upsetting. even knowing what happened and rewatching it, I still felt a bit traumatized by what happened in there. And I will also say that this film did come out in 2011, and it took me back to that time period of when this kind of particular ghost hunting was really popular. Like there were all the TV shows, and it was, people playing around with these ghost hunting tools and trying to catch things, even like the background of the haunting. The first time we're introduced to that, we see the old website, which kind of tells the story of Madeline O'Malley, which is like the ghost bride who who I guess haunts the hotel. And um I kind of liked that because it did kind of take me back to that time period. So yeah, those were some of the things that I liked about this film. But I will say that if listeners like Matt and Mel, you haven't watched any other Ty Wests, I don't know if I would necessarily recommend with starting with this one. Um, because I don't think it really represents who he is as a director, but it's a fun movie to watch, I think, especially for this kind of supernatural um slow burn haunted hotel um aspect of it. So yeah, those are my first impressions. I don't know, where should we start, guys? You want to talk about the hotel itself, or should we start talking about the characters?
Let's talk about the hotel.
Oh, okay, yeah, I think that'd be awesome. So a little bit about it. We've mentioned the Yankee Peddler is a real hotel. It is in Torrington, Connecticut. In fact, there's a Wikipedia page that you can go to and you can read a little bit about it. It has been closed for quite a while. Um, I think maybe very briefly it reopened, but pretty much for like a decade, this hotel has been closed, and people have been trying to come in and renovate it, and it never happened. And then finally, like, the city was like, okay, you have to do something with this. So the most current thing I found is that they are starting a renovation project again, and it's supposed to open. So maybe in the future we can do a little no fear field trip, maybe, and stay in this hotel. But this is the hotel that Ty West and his cast and crew stayed in when he was making House of the Devil, because apparently House of the Devil was filmed close by, and this was one of the like cheapest places he could find that was still like a decent hotel to put his cast and crew up in. And he was talking about how he was going to, he was filming this horror movie, but then they'd go back to the hotel, and it was almost like crazier things were happening at the hotel while they were trying to sleep. That was almost more horrific than what was happening on the film set. So there are some interviews where he talks about that, which is kind of fun. There's one on IndieWire in particular that, talked about him making House of the Devil and then realizing that he wanted to make this film based on that. So that's why, and apparently he had his cast and crew for the Innkeepers stay in the hotel while they were filming this. And Sarah Paxton, uh, the actress who plays Claire in this film, who I guess you could call the lead. I guess it's her and her other employee, but she's the one we follow, I think, the closest. But there's a part in the interview where he talks about the fact that right before they were starting to film, her agent apparently called and said, Sarah's really nervous about staying in this haunted hotel. Like, could you put her up somewhere else and just let her film there and not like sleep there? And he said, yeah. He said, but you know what? Let me talk to her and let me see. And so he convinced her to stay one night in the hotel and said, if you absolutely hated it, like, I'll put you up somewhere else. But apparently she loved it. She loved like the history of the place, and she loved the feel of it. And so she ended up staying there. But I don't know. I just imagine that this was a very fun movie to film. So that's the kind of background of the real Yankee Peddler. at least as it relates to this film. But the Yankee Peddler in the movie is a little bit different. It's a hotel that's very clearly closing down. They're down to 2 employees working the place. There's mention that the owners are off elsewhere, not involved. And they're sleeping there and taking turns basically running it, but they're also involved in ghost hunting or trying to figure out this story of Madeline O'Malley while they're there. Um, I don't know. I think it was a really effective, like having the hotel itself closed down and only having that, what they only had 3 guests, I believe, because they had the actress who was the psychic, they had the mom who was staying there with her son, and then I guess they had the man who had checked in, right? Um,
Yeah, those are the only ones.
yeah. So, and they almost seem, I kind of laughed at this too, but they almost seem annoyed when they have to interact with the guests because um they're just ready to have this place to themselves. So, I don't know, I thought it was a really effective, it reminded me of The Shining, this whole hotel that's nearly closed down, but that doesn't have the guest, but it was different enough that it felt, I don't know, it felt kind of like a fresh take on the empty hotel.
And I wanted to add, I like what you're saying about how it makes the idea of the hotel space even more uncanny, and it reminded you of The Shining. But the history, they did some really interesting things with the idea of like the history of the hotel and the present time, which I thought was really cool. Because like obviously ghost hunting is kind of like a communication with the past. And you already talked about how they have this like bare bones website they're trying to put together that has the information about the woman who supposedly died and was put in the basement and all of that. But one thing that I thought was interesting in the kind of presentation of the hotel was that the very beginning of the movie is like a triptych. It's like different pictures of the hotel from its beginning, which what was it in the 1800s, all the way up to today. So while you're watching kind of the opening credits and hearing the music, you're seeing these kind of pictures move through time until you get to where it is right now. And so from the very beginning of the movie, I was already thinking this place has a long history. And like you said earlier, Lisa, when they would open the door and go out and you'd hear cars or she'd go to the coffee shop, it almost seemed jarring a little bit because there was, while the hotel seemed updated obviously from the 19th century, there was still the pieces that they had in the that one room or like the carriage or whatever. There were like aspects of the past of the hotel in it, and it was really interesting seeing it go from being what seemed like on the outskirts of town to all of a sudden being in the city, and you've got cars going by and you're like, oh wow, so this is supposed to be like the early 2000s. But when they're in the hotel, it really seems like it's hard to tell almost when it is unless you're seeing the people go in and out and kind of go about their lives. So I thought that was really interesting. It kind of prepares you for the encounter with the past that they have, whatever that may mean. Um, and I guess I'll just mention briefly the history that they claim. So they say that on their website that there was this woman named Madeline O'Malley who apparently was left at the altar, um, hanged herself, and then the people who own the hotel, I think I'm remembering this correctly, thought it was going to be a scandal, so they hid her body in the basement for 3 days, like that's not a scandal, and then tried to kind of smuggle her out. And so townspeople get mad, the hotel's sold, and then it opens again in the 1960s. And so that's kind of the past that they're going off of. They're trying to communicate with her, so you literally see the past of the hotel kind of go by in the beginning, and then you have that funny scene where she's telling the story about Madeline O'Malley, and you find out later she's actually telling it to the little kid and freaking him out. But we're set up to kind of not just think of this as a haunted space, but think of this as a space where past and present are kind of colliding in really weird ways. I thought that was a neat way of starting out the movie.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's talk a little bit about the characters that we have here because really this is Claire and Luke's story, although I think having the psychic there, especially played by Kelly McGillis, who I don't know. I probably is the biggest name in the film. um, but it's really clear in Luke's story. Um, and I did think that they had a really fun dynamic in this. I liked I liked the description, and I can't remember. I'm sorry which one of you said it, but that it was almost kind of this like work comedy. Um, they had a really good rapport, and it felt very natural. I think these two in their kind of friendship, and but also like their investigation of the hotel too. That felt, I don't know, that felt very enjoyable watching, like using that as the way into the story. I think was this like investigation that they're doing, because it does kind of start off as like the two of them just sitting and talking and wondering about, like what do you think was is going on? Like who do you think Madeline was? And then it actually moves into them actually having their kind of Scooby Doo investigation of the hotel. But I don't know. I'm curious now that I know this is y'all's first time with Ty West movies. I'm curious to know like what you think of his characters, because I think that's one of his strong suits in filmmaking is creating compelling characters that you want to follow. So yeah, I'm just curious to know what you think.
I I thought he did a really good job with them as characters. Excuse me. Um, I I liked the interactions between the two of them. I thought, like you said, I felt like they had a real chemistry together, not necessarily like romantic chemistry, although I think the guy there did have some intimations at one point. but but no, I thought the two of them really did play well together, if that's a way to put it. Um, and they felt like real characters that had backstories, not just sort of placeholders that were being used to tell a story or something like that. So they didn't dive into their backstory a whole lot directly, but there were like intimations and hints, and I mean they did feel like the characters themselves were real people and not just names thrown on so that we can have these characters investigate a haunted hotel, if that makes sense. Like even though they don't say the backstory directly, it felt like the actors and in writing it, Ty West had kind of thought through who these people were.
Yeah, just in their conversations, we got, some of their backstory. We can kind of, yeah, we learn a lot about them just by watching them working together. Um, and one of the things that I thought was interesting about the pairing of them and the ghost hunting was how they each approached it differently. So, was it Luke kind of seems to be like the veteran ghost hunter. He brought the equipment, and we find out later that his stories about what he'd seen in the hotel were just stories, and so he gets really freaked out and ends up leaving at one point. Whereas then that kind of plays off her. She's kind of the foil to that because she is, I assume it seemed like she hadn't done this very much. Like this was one of, she's kind of new to this. She talks about, when she's alone that first night, tries to get EVPs that she doesn't know how to work the equipment, even though she said she did. And she kind of becomes almost like obsessed with talking to this ghost that she thinks is Madeline O'Malley. Like she says at one point they have a moral imperative to prove that she's there and solve her mystery and bring people's attention to her. And then she kind of becomes almost like a focus of the supernatural aspect of the hotel, whatever that is. It's unclear exactly what's going on. But I thought that was interesting too. Like, not just that we get little bits and pieces of their friendship, and I think Luke wants something more, but we also see like this kind of, he's supposed to be like the grizzled veteran ghost hunter, but he's actually terrified. And then when real stuff starts happening, because he never thought real stuff was going to happen, whereas she kind of wanted stuff to happen and then is like searching for it and just keeps going and going and going. um and so even in that kind of relationship, like her kind of more openness to it seems to play a role maybe in the the traumatic aspect that we kind of mentioned earlier but didn't get into.
So I guess at this point, we're gonna have to put a big like spoilers ahead. Spoilers are gonna lie ahead. If you have not watched the film and you want to be surprised by the end, maybe don't keep listening, or at least hit pause and come back to it once you've watched it. But I feel like we ought to talk about the haunting and the point at which we kind of learn that the ghosts are indeed real. Um, we actually do see the ghosts, which I don't think always works in this type of film. Um, yeah, I don't think it always works. I think this time it does. This time felt, once you get into the actual, like you realize the hotel is haunted and they do find what they're looking for. Um, I think it's satisfying. But I think we ought to talk about it and also talk about that ending a little bit. So Mel, I'm going to ask you first because I'm more curious, just knowing that you are our resident ghost story lover. That like the supernatural seems to really be your jam. Um and as somebody who I think is kind of at least tangentially interested in ghost investigations, how did you feel about the way the supernatural was presented in this?
I like the way they did it. I think, when you were saying that you think it works, it doesn't take away. I don't know. It's hard. I mean, how are you going to present a ghost on screen? That's, difficult. But I thought it worked. I mean, I felt like, and I hate to say this because it makes it sound, and I don't mean this to seem like it's trite or something, but I thought they did really well with the tropes of like supernatural appearances. I mean, these things are like famous ways that ghosts supposedly come to show themselves, or different famous horror supernatural stories out there. You being under the sheets, of course, because ghosts can like fill out the sheet and it's like somebody's in the bed with you, and waking you up. And if somebody hanged themselves and they have to be seen possibly being hanged. I thought the the EVP was interesting. I thought that that led to a lot of kind of creepy factor, I think, so you didn't have to constantly show the ghosts. And the use of like toward the end when her name was being called and things like that, like I thought that was done really well, at least for me, to like make it creepy and kind of build suspense. And that kind of idea, like we're going to record this and explain it kind of thing, but they actually really can't, which I guess was why you needed the medium character in a way. But like I said, it seems like I'm just ticking off tropes of things that happen in supernatural movies or stories, but I thought they were done really well here. And you almost kind of have to do that if you're going off of like a traditional kind of haunted space. Though I do think there's room at the end to say it may, who knows if this is Madeline O'Malley or if they're right about what happened to her. Like things just go sideways. Um, but I thought that the kind of showing of the ghost first through the banging and the knocking and then the voices, and then the visual worked pretty well.
I didn't. I thought it was terrible. I'm kidding.
Now you need to give your points for support of your take.
No, I mean, all I would say is just kind of what echoes what you've already said, and I will kind of defer to you since you have a bit more experience than I do actually ghost hunting. So there is that. But no, I agree with all the points that you already said. I think it worked really well in terms of like building atmospheric tension throughout without without having to constantly show the ghosts or things of that nature.
So Mel, in your, I guess, ghost hunting past, did you ever have a ghost bride pop up next to you?
No, I have not. I've never had a ghost anything pop up next to me. I would be very scared if that happened. I would not keep following it like Claire does.
um, yeah, okay, so let's talk about Claire a little bit because I don't know, I feel protective of her and I think we're supposed to. Um, but she has this, which we haven't really mentioned, but she has this like kind of fangirl relationship to Leanne, the older actress who's staying in the hotel, who is now no longer an actress, but is now a psychic medium. Or I guess she always was a psychic medium, but now like that's what she's doing for her career. She's supposedly in town because there's like a psychic convention going on, and she chose this hotel, which you know, I don't know. That is interesting. I'd like to know more about her character, but Claire, is excited to see her just from her acting experience, like not really anything to do with the psychic connection, I guess. But Leanne is watching Claire the whole time. Like there was that one scene which I thought was really funny where Claire is trying to, and it goes on for so much longer than like you'd think it needs to, but this is I think what we were kind of talking about, like the slow pacing of the film and how it really anchors you in the space. But it's where she's trying to throw the trash into the dumpster outside, and she can't quite figure out how to like keep the lid to the dumpster open while she throws the trash in there, which I felt was very relatable because I feel like that would be like live footage of me trying to do the same thing. Um, but she notices that Leanne is watching her from her like window rather ominously from her hotel window, and this is after they've already had kind of a connection. So I don't know, Leanne, I kind of wonder how much Leanne knew it's coming because she does warn Claire like to stay away from the basement. And we've already heard, I guess, noises from this door, which of course we're going to find out is like connected to Madeline because that's where they kept her body after the suicide. But um she warns her against this, and then she's heard noises. They've like padlocked it, I guess, or whatever. um but then when the elderly man who came to stay at the hotel and had asked for the honeymoon suite, after he dies by suicide, and that's when she sees like Madeline's ghost, um she ends up running from the third floor, which had already been, I mean, this is a little kind of confusing, but I felt disorienting maybe. Like intentionally so, but she ends up in the basement. And that's where she can't get out because she had locked it because she had heard the noises. I don't know. How did you feel about that? Because yes, she does kind of keep investigating even after she's like seen Madeline, but also like the fact that she ends up running kind of into the basement or towards the basement. And that's, I mean, granted, the elderly man shows up as a ghost and scares her and everything, but like, I don't know. Every time I watch it, I just want to be like, okay, it was so simple. Like, stay away from the basement, and you didn't stay away from the basement. It kind of broke my heart. Um, but yeah, what did you make of that ending with Claire? I mean, because she does. Well, we know from the beginning that she has asthma, and she ends up getting trapped down there, has an asthma attack. Luke can't get her out. And she kind of becomes one of the ghosts in the hotel. How did you feel about that?
I felt awful for her, but I'm also like, I bet I could do that to myself, right? Like lock the one in you need to get out of, and then you're trapped. Um, because yeah, when she hears the noises coming from the outside cellar door, because this is like this is a basement where you can go down the steps into the basement from inside the hotel, but you can also go through the cellar doors on the outside to get in, and it's just a bird. I'm sure it was probably something more than that, but it's just a bird. And so she puts the padlock back on. And I figured at that moment that was going to play, it would have to play a pivotal role. But I don't know. I too was like, why are you going back down the basement? Because she is warned at least twice by our resident psychic medium not to go in the basement. Like when she first contacts when she gets the EVP and she wakes everybody up, and the medium gets her crystal out and she contacts the spirits in the hotel. She basically says there's three spirits and they won't say who they are and they want to live, and there was a terrible tragedy and a terrible mistake, and it's like, don't go to the basement. Like there's nothing you can do. And so she's warned once, and then after they have their encounter in the basement and Luke runs away, she takes the medium down into the basement, and the medium's like, oh, they just broke my crystal, like we got to get out of here, it's not safe. And when your medium says that, you need to get out. Um so yeah, when she went back down and she was waiting on Luke she's obviously traumatized because now she's seen the elderly man dead, and Luke comes back and he's trying to get Lee the medium. She hears someone saying her name from the basement. So she thinks it's the medium. She thinks it's Lee. At least that's what she's like, is that you? So I don't know. Like part of me is like, why didn't you just run out of the hotel? But another part of me is like, I guess if you hear someone calling your name and there was another woman in there with you and you're unsure, you think she's in there, you might check. And like you said, then the elderly man's a ghost and he scares her. So she can't go, he's hurting her to that door. She can't really go back. So, I mean, at the end of things like this, you're often like, well, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? Why did you make this decision? As the viewer, I was okay with the way it ended. I mean, the fact that the ghosts were hurting her helped me kind of go with the fact that she would go down there. But I don't know. I mean, it is, if she just had chosen to leave, the movie would be over, and that can't happen. Um, but yeah, I felt like it was suitably tragic because, like you said, we know she has asthma. We know she locked the padlock, and now she's basically trapped between a ghost and locked cellar doors. There's no way for her to get out. And I guess she was pretty much targeted to stay there as a ghost from the very beginning of her going in, which is also really sad and tragic because she went in with so much hope that she was going to be able to communicate with folks and help them. Um, Yeah. It was just really sad at the end. I mean, it was of course terrifying when the ghosts were chasing her, but it was also really sad that that was how she ended up.
Well, and just to add too, I like that it does have that plausible deniability built in since she died of an asthma attack that um since this is not found footage, this is like a regular movie, um you know all of the voices calling her and all of that could, from a certain perspective, have all been in her head or have been explained away, as something that she was imagining. So, I mean, it does a good job of giving itself the, was it really ghosts or wasn't it? And I get the feeling that the film itself is leaning towards, yeah, it was ghosts, especially the very, very end of the movie. But it does a good job of kind of balancing that tightrope walk of, making you question, okay, is it really supernatural? Because everything is explainable in a way.
Here's a question for you. Do you feel like Claire, because Mel, you kind of mentioned it a little bit where you said that they were kind of hurting, the ghosts were hurting her, like almost like they wanted her to join them, like they had chosen her in some way. And when you were saying that, like it almost feels like she's haunting the movie already before the end even happens. Um and part of that is, I think, her relationship with the medium and the medium watching her so carefully. But also, okay, like for instance, the noises she hears down in the basement. Are we to believe that those are, like you said, like maybe birds or something down there? Is that Madeline's ghost that is causing problems and that we're hearing that? Or is that kind of like if hauntings are kind of this, and stick with me here a little bit, but if hauntings are kind of this thing that is um a loop that exists outside of time as we understand it, is she kind of already hearing her own ghost rattling down there um before it's even happened? Like I kind of wondered that, where even though the ending is sad, where it almost feels inevitable for Claire. Like I don't know if it could have ended any other way. And the psychic seems to also kind of think that too, because she makes it clear to Luke later that Claire couldn't have been saved. Like, I don't know. And then we get the kind of final vision of the film being Claire's ghost. So I don't know. I feel like it was almost to me like the ghost that she was hunting, the ghost that she was like trying to help, was her the whole time. Maybe that's a stretch, but I just felt like it was inevitable that she was going to end up that way. Which I think is another reason I like this film so much. But I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too much into that. What y'all silence makes me nervous. But what do you think about that?
So she
No,
was
I agree.
always already haunting the hotel.
Don't.
I just had to throw that in there.
There is no Derrida haunting this podcast. But yes. I mean, because I think that is a common like ghost haunting trope, is that these hauntings exist outside of time. I mean, that's what they are. Is like almost like a looping. Um so yes, I think she was always already haunting.
Well, and I was just going to say I agree with that statement that her ending did feel sort of preordained or inevitable. Like it definitely felt like that was the trajectory of the film. And it I think ultimately would have been kind of unsatisfying if it had ended any other way. I mean, I didn't want her to die, but it still it felt like it was necessary for the way the plot had been constructed.
No, I like that interpretation that she's kind of, yeah, 'cause I mean it takes us back to like when we talked about that movie was a Ghost Story, where the ghost is like just always there. And yeah, if you become a ghost, I guess you're untied from time. So, you know, I don't know. That's an interesting way of looking. I mean, whether that was what was intended or not is a really interesting way of looking at it. And I think it helps with that idea of the preordained fatality of it, that you were saying, Matt. And I also thought it was interesting too that I don't know. I feel like the ghost hunters just like, I mean, not as they have to in horror movies, they just completely misunderstand the brief, right? I mean, they're so obsessed with the story that they've heard of this woman, and this has to be what happened. But every time the medium contacts these things, they don't seem, I don't know, there's a almost a predatory aspect to what's going on. And so I think there's also maybe even competing narratives. Like they're like, we're going to prove this woman exists and figure out if she really hanged herself. And I think the mediums points are what the medium is saying is pointing to maybe the end being a bad place, or maybe something else happened. Like maybe she wasn't dead and they put her in the basement and left her there and she died. I don't know. We don't know because it's ambiguous. But I definitely feel like there's something else. There's something that they're never going to understand going on in the house, and they're just going along like, we're going to prove this historical story and make our website. And the medium kind of shows that it's way more complicated and there's so much more going on. And so maybe Claire is like the excited, almost kind of naive. I hate to use naive because that seems too strong a word for her, kind of almost innocence in ghost hunting, I guess, is the perfect target in a way for what's going on there. I'm not sure, but I like this idea of the kind of circular haunting, or that maybe this space has picked out the next ghost to join the menagerie. I mean, the guy who commits suicide in a honeymoon suite, like, is there a reason he chose to do that? There's a lot of open-ended parts of this movie that don't bother me. Um, but it makes you start to question those things, like you're saying, Lisa, and start finding little bits and pieces and places and interpret them in different ways, which is fun. If you're like us and you have English degrees.
All right. Well, I mean, I feel like unless you have anything else to add, that's a pretty good place to end on this. I do feel bad for Claire, but um I don't know. As you said, I think this was kind of inevitable. Maybe they chose her for a reason, because she did seem to really care about getting these stories out. But with that, I'm going to say that that is it for today. Um, you can find us on social media at NoFearCast. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon. We also have merchandise available at our website, nofearcast.com, or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free, but it does help other listeners find us. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.